Rachel Clarke for joining me today. Great to have you with me. Let's get cracking. I usually start by asking the people I'm speaking to, what has been the last year been like for you? But obviously, you've recently published an amazing book called Breathtaking, which details what life was like working in the NHS with COVID-19 during the first wave of the pandemic. So maybe I shouldn't ask how's the last year been for you, but I suppose ask, what can we take from the book, or what should we be taking from the book, which will help us with whatever comes next?
We've all been through an almighty year, haven't we? Everybody in some shape or form, I think, has lost something during the pandemic, even if it's simply peace of mind and security and certainty in life. That's kind of best case scenario. Worst case is you may have lost your livelihood, your job, your children may have mental health problems, or you may have been bereaved. You may have lost one or even multiple members of your family. So the one thing that unites us all is that everybody has been through an experience of loss this year. And I think for me personally, I have witnessed a very extreme version of that. So I'm a palliative care doctor. I've been working on those COVID front lines in my local hospital for the last year. And in one sense, it was shattering, unbelievable. All those words like unprecedented, unimaginable, they were all true. I'm a doctor who works with death and dying, but I'd never experienced anything like this. But I also have come through learning something really profound, and it's this: although the hospital in a pandemic was horrible in many ways, deeply traumatic, it was also remarkable. I was lucky enough to witness at work every single day human beings at their absolute best, by which I mean, yes, being frightened, yes, sometimes feeling as though they can't go on, but somehow, whether they were patients or family members or members of staff in the NHS, finding it within themselves to be strong, be courageous, be kind to each other, to look outwards towards each other, and really demonstrate all those things that, to my mind, make up the absolute best of human nature.
So can I ask, for businesses out there who have got employees and everyone's been living through the pandemic and dealing with their own mental health issues and their family and friends and everything going on for them, how do leaders of the team and also just fellow employees, when they aren't sure how to deal with the person in front of them or don't even know how to interact with them, what advice can you give them about how they should be acting? What should be the best way of acting under these circumstances?
I, in a way, am a specialist in the most difficult kinds of conversations you can have. So I'll talk to families who are losing someone, or a patient who's confronting a diagnosis of a terminal illness, for example. And it's always difficult in those conversations to find exactly the right words. You worry that if you say the wrong thing, you might upset someone, you might hurt them without meaning to. And I think that applies more broadly in a corporate cultural setting as well. And I would suggest that for companies, just as palliative care doctors, the most important thing is to show to the people you're communicating with that you sincerely want to understand what it's like for them. There isn't a right form of words here, but if you can sincerely and openly say to your staff, for instance, this has been tough. We can't imagine the ways it has been tough for you each as individuals, but we want to find out, because that's the first step to figuring out how we can support you from this point onwards. That's never going to be the wrong thing to do. And the other thing I'd suggest that's really important is it's absolutely incredible in the NHS how powerful it is when somebody who has a position of real authority, real standing, the boss, the head of a hospital, for example, actually opens up a little bit themselves and almost models through their example the risk-taking of being honest and sharing something that is maybe personal or perhaps a little bit difficult to share with staff. If you can model how to do that, then you're almost inviting and showing to your staff that it's okay for them to do that too.
What we've seen in terms of a more empathetic society, I suppose, do you think this is kind of embedded now in our framework, or do you worry that we will go back to being kind of maybe slightly more hard-nosed and reserved? And if so, is it down to, as you say, the leaders to keep on pushing that agenda?
That's a very interesting question. And it is incontrovertibly the fact that when this all began last year, we witnessed the most extraordinary, spontaneous outpouring of kindness and decency and desire to help each other that certainly I've ever experienced in my lifetime. It was absolutely incredible. And whatever has happened since, that's real, and that tells us something about us as a society. But on this question of whether or not it will endure, if you use words like kindness and well-being, hashtag be kind to each other, without really meaning it, without really backing up those phrases with action, then the team you're working with will see through that straight away. And I think I can say, as an NHS employee who's constantly told to work on my well-being by taking a Zumba class at lunchtime, when no one on the front line in the NHS has any time to do anything remotely like that, it's absolutely infuriating when you feel as though someone's paying lip service to the power of kindness, supporting each other, and so on. But if you sincerely back up those phrases with action, if you are actually committed to finding a kinder, more supportive way forwards for the staff in your organisation, then they recognise it, and it really matters. And so instead of offering classes that no one has time to take, how about saying, we're listening to you, we've heard what you're saying, and actually, here's an NHS example. Everybody this year is getting an extra day of annual leave on their birthday to say thank you for the work we've done during the pandemic. It's tiny, it doesn't make up for anything, but it's such a beautiful gesture, and it's a way of making the rhetoric around kindness real. And that's the way to harness your team, I think, and make them willing to believe in you, because you're demonstrating through your actions that their well-being matters to you.
You've been very vocal over the last year in terms of what social media, kind of out there in the press, about kind of the pandemic and what we've lived through and everything around that. First, I should ask, kind of, how do you feel towards the NHS as a whole? And also, kind of, as a secondary question to that, how frustrated do you get in terms of, we are all exposed to a massive amount of noise of experts and people out there who have a voice, which on one hand we hear the whole time is brilliant now because anyone has a voice. But as someone who comes from a position which we should respect, because you are living and breathing everything that we've been through over the last year, how frustrated do you get in terms of maybe actually your voice isn't rising above the noise?
Yeah, this is very difficult, because social media, of course, in one sense gives everybody a voice, but in another can be a very effective way of silencing certain voices. You know, we're familiar with trolls, abuse online, people being piled on, and so on. And interestingly, in the last year, lots of NHS members of staff have experienced a lot of that, simply for standing up and saying, COVID is real, it's serious, our hospitals are filled with patients, many of whom are dying. I think what I have learned over the course of the last year, perhaps more than anything, is the absolute vital importance of communicating sincerely. It's okay to get things wrong. You can make mistakes, you can say sorry, and people will respect that. But you have to be honest in what you're trying to communicate. And it has to come from a position of either expertise, you know the area, or perhaps first-hand testimony, it's real. The very worst thing is 1,001 individuals mouthing off about something that they feel very deeply. They're obviously passionate about it, but they actually won't take us 1 millisecond back and try and reflect a little bit on what they're saying and the manner in which they're saying it. Or crucially, they won't give that millisecond to someone else. They won't give them the millisecond to listen to what someone else is saying and actually take it seriously. And I think we could all go a long way post-pandemic to making Britain a genuinely kinder place if, before we voiced our own opinions, we held off a sec and remembered, let's listen to that person's story, it matters.
Last question for you. Briefly touched on your world and kind of how you look at it differently from us and how we can all need to be looking at it differently in a better way. But when you're speaking to an audience and you're in front of them, what are you looking for them to take away from your experience, and what are you looking for them to feel and learn from you?
I'm going to say something ridiculous, but simple and true, all at the same time. I think that everything I write about, talk about in public, and actually do as a doctor every day is fundamentally about the meaning of life. And by that I mean, on paper, I work with death. I'm a palliative care doctor. So you might think that's depressing and dismal, and why on earth would anybody choose to spend all their years of training to specialize in that? And the answer is, literally every single day at work, I am caring for people for whom all the small stuff no longer applies. The stuff we know we shouldn't worry about, like our wrinkles or getting old or putting on weight or whatever it might be, all of that is stripped away. The only things that matter for my patients are the really important things. And usually that boils down to one thing alone. It's the people they love around them. It might be other small things. It might be the sound of birds or sunshine outside, but fundamentally everything extraneous is stripped away. And I therefore come away at the end of each day at work having been told over and over again by the example of my patients what matters in life, what is important. And I think the pandemic, our collective experience over the last year, has done exactly the same thing writ large. We've been shown as a society, as a world, what matters in life. When it really comes to it, what means the most. It's the people we love, it's protecting them, it's trying to keep vulnerable people safe. It's demonstrating love to each other. And that's not a glib or trite or simple message when you've spent a year on COVID wards. It is the most profound thing. And that's what I'd like to communicate to people.
Rachel Clarke, thank you so much for your time today, and it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you very much.